I love going to cons. I love meeting people, especially people that like I've met through the internet. Like you've been in my Twitch stream chats for a while, and I'd love to meet more people who are fans of the stream and everything. I've done a couple of Houston area cons where you might recognize Beth Ann. She's come to see me at conventions, and Haikyu Simp as they go by on Twitch. I don't want to out their real names or anything like that. Of
course.
But and Amalia, I think was the other girl. I think Amalia and Haikyu Simp were like related, and then Beth Ann came to say hi, and a few other people I think have like. I'd be at a show and they'd be like, oh, I also kind of watch your stream, but I can't remember off the top of my head what their usernames might be. And I'm like, oh yeah, just feel free to let me know. Like if you see me at a convention and you watch the stream and stuff, I love to know because sometimes
hard
people...
to miss somebody like me. It's kind of hard to miss somebody like myself. I mean, I'm blind, you know, I got the cane and the sunglasses that kinda is the stereotypical look. Plus I'll be dropping a panda plushie on your desk just to let you know it's really him.
All right, I'll keep an eye out for you. And then, oh yeah, what I was gonna say is I know that some people, they'll be like watching the stream and not participating in chat or anything like that. They just like to have it on in the background. I'm kind of the same way with streams. Whenever I watch a stream, I don't really participate as much as I just kind of watch. So if anybody listening to this watches the stream or like doesn't or doesn't like participate in the chat or anything like that, I'd still love to know if it's something that you watch. Yeah.
Well, I enjoy watching your stream, and you somehow put up with my bratitude. Yeah, let's call it that.
Bratitude.
So you said you've written scripts for certain animes. Who did anybody give you any advice? Tell you like, hey, this script writing job is not the same as being a director, or if you've done some ADR directing on the side, or like assistant ADR directing, has an ADR director said, hey, this is completely different than acting, or have you gotten any advice from any of those from those fields, or even voice acting in general?
Yeah. So when applying my knowledge as an actor to scripting and directing, because I have done a little bit of assistant directing, not a ton. I've been looking into doing a little bit more of it up here in Dallas, but I haven't done it yet. I've just kind of looked into it, but I did do a little bit of assistant directing on Danmachi season 3 and Food Wars season 4 here and there, and it's definitely interesting because as an actor, you go in and you kind of have your tool set and you kind of have your way of tackling a script or different scenes and characters and stuff like that. On the directing side of things, it's very interesting to see how other actors interpret those same scenes and stuff. So like I'll be reading through the script to prep for a session to direct and stuff like that. Like I'll watch the episode ahead of time to see what's happening so that I have the context for the person recording. And I'll be reading through the script while watching the episode. And I'll have in my brain like, oh, that's kind of how I'm reading this in my head. And I would get into the director chair, as it were, to work with an actor on a scene. And they would come at it with like maybe they would sometimes have the exact same idea I did. Sometimes they'll have a slightly different take on it. And I find it interesting how many different ways you can interpret things. And I feel like one of the things that I always try to do whenever I go in as a director, especially as an assistant director, is to collaborate with the person performing. I've had in the past, and I don't want to like call out anybody or anything like that, but I've worked with some directors in the past who come from an acting background, and a lot of actors tend to have that same thing where they have their own interpretation of a script or a scene or anything like that. And some directors who have more of an actor's background or an actor's brain, some of them try and direct the person they're working with towards their personal like reading of the thing, instead of letting it be more of a collaborative process where you're kind of back and forth with each other and you throw out your ideas and find what works, so that you both have your own creative inputs. At the end of the day, you are, as an actor, there to take direction and do what the director wants you to do. But as a director, you're also there to be open to other perspectives and seeing that the actor's creative input as well, and not just dismissing it fully in favor of your own ideas for how something should be in your brain. And then in terms of script writing, I haven't done a ton of it. I've literally only written the one script, which was The Executioner and Her Way of Life. And one of the things that I try to take away from scriptwriters that I enjoy the work of is the ability to make translated material sound like natural. And there are definitely instances where I would be working on the episode and it was just like I would take forever to try and come up with a way to word something that like A, felt natural, B, got the same message across as what the original translation intended, and then also have it fit the animation, like the mouth movements and everything like that. So oftentimes I would just try to, when I would get stuck on something like that, I would just highlight it and be like, I'm going to come back to that later and see if I can't come back with a fresh idea later. But some of the writers that I tend to enjoy the work of are Madeline Morris, Young E. Chang, two great friends of mine who have been on the stream before. And then Caitlin Barr, she's a Houston person, migrated to Dallas as well a few years back, and she's done a lot of great work up here in Dallas. And I remember her scripts always stood out to me as really great whenever I would see them down in Houston as well. And yeah.
Well, if I could just take a moment to say some of my favorite scriptwriters, since we are on the subject of scriptwriters, Clint Bickham has wrote some pretty great scripts. I believe he did some work for Funimation or for Dallas at some point.
Yeah.
The Ultimate Otaku Teacher script, and I believe it was him and Kyle Phillips. A lot of people didn't like it because of how referencey it was. I thought it was perfect. A very good dub.
And I've heard this, I think from like Caitlin and Clint, and I believe Caitlin talks about Clint as like sort of a mentor for her whenever she first started into script writing. And I think I don't keep up with their goings on, but I think Clint either is or was at some point the lead writer on One Piece. And I believe Holly Sagara has started to work a bit more on One Piece as well, thanks to Clint and everything like that. So Clint's definitely one of the good ones too. One of the better ADR script adapters. And you mentioned an aspect of script adaptation when it comes to like references and humor and stuff like that. And I find myself agreeing with a lot of the things I've heard. Caitlin, I haven't really heard Clint speak at length about adaptation and writing scripts for ADR, but I've heard in a couple of panels here and there Caitlin talk about how she approaches adapting stuff like that. And I kind of agree with the idea that in something like a comedy, the author's intent, even though authors and animators and scriptwriters of the original work, even though they had a specific joke that they wrote for the original language, sometimes those jokes don't land super well without some sort of like cultural explanation or like a translator's note in the corner. And at the end of the day, the intent of the author of that work is to make the audience laugh. They wrote a joke there to make the audience laugh. They put a pop culture reference there. Maybe it's a Japanese pop culture reference that is a little bit too obscure to really land in America. So maybe it's still in keeping with the intent of the author to change the joke to something that lands a little easier in American audiences. And you get into the argument of purism of translation versus like adapting the work to appeal to the audience that this adaptation is for. Because English dubs at the end of the day are for an American audience, and if people are a little bit more interested in having the purest, most direct translation experience, that's really what the subtitle version is for. I feel like when adapting into English, it's important to keep the message of the original as closely as possible, while also putting out a piece of media that like does what it's going for. If it's a piece of dramatic, if it's a dramatic anime, like where it's very serious and maybe it'll have humor here and there, but if it's mostly just really dark and serious and straight, then I feel like you have a little less leeway in terms of changing too much. But with something like a screwball comedy or just like It is mainly comedy. I feel like comedy in particular it's so culturally entwined. Comedy is so like married to the culture from which the comedy comes from. So Japanese humor, while there is a lot of overlap between what Japan finds funny and Japan audiences find funny and American audiences find funny, there are still like little bits here and there where I feel like it serves the work better to change things as needed to make the purpose of this media to land better in the intended audience's eyes and ears and whatnot.
And you made a comment about dramas not having the comedy. I think a perfect example of having, because a lot of people thought Steins Gate's dub was too referential, and it is very dated. But it is very dated because there are references to things that would only be in the early 2010s to early 2000s. I mean, but it was enough of. It was a nice. People have debated on whether or not it was a good dub or not based on the fact that it was referential. But I believe that if the script, if there was a reference made in Japanese that, like you said, that would only be a reference to a Japanese thing, then we switch it in the English to make people understand the English version. And there's a difference between that and just we're going to make ghost stories.
Something like, and people love to bring up ghost stories as an example of oh, that's a good dub and stuff like that because they just did whatever they want, and it's so interesting and funny to me to see the people that would usually tout like purism in English dub translation, and they see that as, I guess, like an exception to the rule. But I mean, it's such an outlier series. I don't know too much about the actual background behind what went into the adaptation. All I know is that the mythology of that dub, or at least the story surrounding the dub, was that it didn't do so well in Japan, that the licensors told ADV at the time to do whatever you want with it, just make sure it sells. And you can definitely tell by the fact that it's still culturally referenced and people still refer to it today. I think that they did a good job at making sure that it sold here in America, because it clearly has had a lot of staying power in terms of anime fandom. But then there's also the argument that I've seen people go around mentioning that, like, well, even though ghost stories didn't do so well in Japan, who are we to like take it and do what we want with it and run with it? And I can't really comment too much on that because I still enjoy a lot of what they were able to do with that dub in particular. But at the same time, I feel like the time which ghost stories came out, what would they have considered to be not performing well in Japan, so just do whatever you want with it, versus like there is so much more anime being produced nowadays that, like, to be totally frank, not all of it's really great. And like at what point do we decide, like, oh, what's worthy of being treated so like perfectly and pure and like we have to stick to the original intent as much as possible, versus what nowadays would be considered a ghost stories in ghost stories time, and it's fine, we can dub that like a ghost stories, whatever. And I don't know where I feel like the truth in all things lies somewhere in between, where it's like, well, I feel like any piece of artwork deserves respect, at least enough respect to the point where you can see what the original creator was going for. And if for example, like with ghost stories, if they actually have full license from the creators to say, hey, do whatever you want, then I feel like that's free license to do so. But I kind of got a little bit rambly. I kind of lost my train of thought because that happens often. But yeah, I haven't seen the Steins Gate dub myself.